So I've been reading Happy by Darren Brown, which is a book about the philosophy of happiness written by a magician, out of all people. And towards the end of the book, I found a passage which I found really interesting. It was a moment where I was like, wow, that's so true. The present is a fact, the future is contingent. While an antidote to the fear of death is to embrace the present, we cannot remain there for long. At some point we want to know what the use the current objects of our attention are to us, or how they might affect us for better or worse, or how they compare to what we have seen before. And with these new thoughts we disconnect from the now and give over to our imaginations. Now, why was this quote so significant? If we put the fear of death part to the side and narrow down on the rest of it, what we see is a confirmation of the fact that the mind always needs to try and make something out of the moment and struggles to let the moment be as it is. Sometimes it feels like silence is the very enemy of the mind, because the mind could be using it to further us somehow, but instead it's just being left to do nothing. This, in essence, as dramatic as it sounds, is the curse of being human. Most of us could probably agree that we are addicted to thinking, but we don't really see it as an addiction. If an addiction is something that we continue to do even though we know it's bad for us and we feel a lack of willpower to even have a choice in the matter, then why would thinking not qualify for it? I've read a little bit of The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate, and in it he has a really good quote. When a society normalizes something, even when it's harmful, we no longer question it. If everyone is doing it, it must be okay. If we accept the fact that everyone else must have as crazy of a mind as we do, it's almost like we don't treat it as a big of a problem anymore. Now I'm going to circle back to this idea of thinking as an addiction, but first let's talk about why the mind even feels a need to put everything in boxes all the time and refrain from letting the silence play out. Well, the simplest answer would be that the greatest chances of survival would come about when we are constantly trying to optimize and reason our way to giving ourselves the best outcomes possible. And a tendency of the mind is to overemphasize anything it can when it comes to survival. If chances of survival can be increased through reason, it will use reason as much as it can to do so. The mind is constantly trying to predict the future based on its collection of memories and experiences from the past. And so the mind tends to be in a perpetual state of planning to often try and avoid painful experiences that have happened in the past. But man, can this take a toll on us. If our minds are constantly doing this, then it's so easy to forget what peace is. Yes, fantastic, we're surviving, but we are caught on the perpetual turning of the hamster wheel of survival, and it need not be so incessant. And we're going to talk about how we can get there. But first, a bit of background. So the first person I heard talking about thinking as an addiction was Eckhart Tolle, who is a very well-known spiritual leader. He says very blatantly that thinking is an addiction and most people are addicted to their thoughts. This is a bit of a wake-up call because it prompts us to step into the awareness of what's going on in our heads and question the fact if we're addicted to what's going on in there. It only takes a small amount of awareness to see how much you really are caught up in your mind. But I want to make it clear that this is the way it's actually meant to be by default. The first priority of the brain is survival. It's not to promote a sense of peace and happiness in us. That comes secondary to survival. And so it would rather that we're caught up in all these stories and all these games, because to the brain, if we weren't, that would mean a decrease of likelihood in survival. Eckhart also says that the mind is a wonderful servant, but a terrible master. And when left unexamined, the mind is left as the master. Believe it or not, a huge amount of what goes on in the mind is autonomous, and we often think that what it's doing is actually us doing it. But these are patterns which oftentimes have been running for a number of years, and they're built on foundational structures like our belief systems and our egos. So if there are all of these automatic things going on under the surface and our minds are just playing out their patterns, what does it mean to no longer have the mind as the master but instead be the servant again? Well, it comes down to one thing, and that is your awareness. Because all of these patterns work at their absolute best when you are, in a sense, on autopilot. Now, the awareness is simply the knowing of what's going on. It's a function of our consciousness, which allows us to be in immediate proximity with what's going on instead of being at a strange distance from it, where things seem to run automatically without you particularly knowing about it. So for example, when you're going through your day on autopilot, doing most of the things that you did the day before, you don't need to think about it, you're simply doing it. You might be thinking about something else. Put simply, when we have a high level of awareness, we're not going to be sucked into these automatic rabbit holes of thought anymore, because we can catch them before they catch us. Eckhart Tolle calls this identification. It's when essentially we are fused with our thoughts and we cannot tell the difference between ourselves and the thought itself. And this is exactly what's going on when the mind is the master. Identification relies on us to be in this sleepy state of not really knowing the difference between what we're thinking and who's perceiving the thought. Because everything we're talking about here implies a separation between that which is being perceived and the perceiver itself. And if we are the awareness, looking down on the mind, speaking its random thoughts, there is a separation between the two. Now, if this seems abstract to you, that's absolutely understandable. It is abstract, and it can only be made more concrete if you spend more time as the observer, just simply watching thoughts go past and noticing the separation between yourself, the observer, and that which is going past. You'll notice that you're not actually the one bringing up the thoughts. They just seem to come up. It's like, oh, I didn't do that. I didn't decide to think about giraffes or what I did yesterday. That actually came up by itself. And this is a crazy moment, because you may have been thinking for a very long time that every single thought that comes up in your mind is something that you did consciously. And I'll be honest, this topic right here is going to have to be probably something for a different video, because this goes very deep in itself. But the main thing to take away is why having this kind of awareness brings your power back to you and leaves the mind where it should be, as your servant. And this is essentially what meditation and mindfulness promote. You're systematically pulling yourself out of the grip that the mind has on you at first, and its ability to take you down the rabbit hole without you even wanting to go down there. It's important to note that these are long-term investments that we make, because anything pertaining to the mind is usually a long-term process. Especially something at these deeper levels. Long-term changes in awareness are intentionally fostered, and it's very natural to kind of dip in and out of awareness throughout your day, and gradually the ratio turns more in favor of awareness, and that trend just continues. Over time we acquaint ourselves with the gaps in between our thoughts rather than the thoughts themselves, and we start to see a level of being which we didn't even know existed, and that is the awareness of the stillness in between the blips of disturbance that we experience as our thoughts and our emotions and all those things which seem to upset the very natural homeostasis of silence and stillness. It's only because we add things on top of something which is inherently complete, peaceful and still that we feel something is out of whack. But that is the whole game of being a human being. There is a strange interplay between that which is autonomous and messy and that which is pure, unadulterated and peaceful. And when you start to increase your awareness more, you start to really notice the interplay between these two aspects as you shift between the two extremes. Okay, that was a bit of a journey. I hope you found some use in it. And if there's any parts of the video that you want me to expand on more, please feel free to let me know, and I'll see you in the next one.